You cannot trust him, Robb. Theon Greyjoy's voice was low, urgent, cutting through the quiet hum of the king's solar in Riverrun. Outside, the northern army rested, tasting the sweet air of victory after the Whispering Wood. Inside, they were planning a war. I know you think of my father as a potential ally, another king to stand with you against the Lannisters. He is not. He is the iron price. He will see your need as weakness, an opportunity to reave and burn while the wolves are away from their den. Robb Stark, king in the north, looked at the man he had called brother for 10 years. He saw no trace of the arrogant, swaggering boy who had first arrived at Winterfell. This was a man, his features sharpened by the realities of war, his eyes clear with a certainty that was unsettling. He is your father, Theon. He would fight for his son. He would see his son as a fool for bending the knee to a Stark, Theon countered, stepping closer to the map table, his hands flat on the parchment. He sent me away a boy. He doesn't know the man. He will assume I am your puppet, a Greenland boy playing at soldier. He will hear my proposal of alliance, and he will laugh. Then he will take our offer of ships, sail them to the stony shore, and burn everything from Sea Dragon Point to the Salt Spear. He will crown himself while your back is turned. It was a brutal assessment, delivered without malice, only a grim, familial knowledge. This was the conversation that had haunted Theon for weeks. In the original version of this plan, the one whispered between them in the early days of the march, he had argued for this very embassy. He had seen it as his chance to finally be the man his father wanted, a prince of the sea returning with a fleet for his king. But that was before the battles, before he had stood shoulder to shoulder with Robb, before he had felt the visceral, grounding loyalty of the northern lords, who now nodded to him in the camps, calling him the Sea Wolf. He was no longer a boy seeking approval. He was a commander in the king in the North's army. "What would you have me do then?" Robb asked, his trust in Theon warring with his desperate need for a fleet. "I need to threaten Lannisport. I need to pull Tywin's eyes west." "Then let me do it," Theon said, his finger jabbing at the map, tracing the coastline. "Don't send me to Pike to beg. Send me to White Harbor. Give me Lord Manderly's ships. He is your bannerman, sworn and loyal. He will not turn his cloak. Let me take his fleet and 1,000 good Northmen. I will give you the western coast, not as a reaver, but as a wolf. We will harry their supply lines, burn their fishing fleets, make it impossible for them to resupply Lord Tywin from the sea. We will bleed the lion, cut by cut, while you hold him here by the throat. My father respects only strength. When he sees the Kraken's son commanding a northern fleet and winning, then he might listen. Not before." Maester Luwin, who had been listening silently, stroked his gray beard. "Theon's knowledge of the sea is not to be discounted, Your Grace, nor is his assessment of his father's character. Lord Balon has broken faith with the North before." Robb looked from the maester to Theon. He saw the fire in his friend's eyes, the fierce conviction. This wasn't the preening plea of a hostage trying to prove his worth. It was the sound, strategic counsel of a brother trying to protect his family. For 10 years, Ned Stark had treated Theon Greyjoy not as a prisoner, but as a ward. He had sat at their table, trained in their yard, and learned their words. Winter is coming. He was taught that loyalty was not a chain, but a choice made every day. In that moment, Theon was choosing. He was choosing Robb. He was choosing the North. "Very well," Robb said, a slow smile spreading across his face. The weight of uncertainty lifted. "The Sea Wolf of the North. I like the sound of that. Go to White Harbor. Lord Manderly will give you what you need. Show the lion what happens when the wolf learns to swim." Theon grinned, a flash of the old bravado, but this time it was earned. He'll wish he'd stayed on his rock. The news reached Pike on the wings of a storm-battered raven. Balon Greyjoy read the scroll in the salt throne chamber, the air thick with the smell of brine and damp stone. His face, already a mask of grim disappointment, hardened into granite. Robb Stark had been declared king in the north, and at his side, accepting the fealty of the northern lords, was his son, his heir. "He calls himself the Sea-Wolf," Balon spat, crushing the parchment in his fist. "He commands the fat Manderly's ships. He fights for the pup whose father took him from me." Asha Greyjoy stood near the hearth, sharpening a throwing axe. She watched her father, her expression unreadable. "He wins his battles, from what the merchants say. He sacked a Lannister port near Fair Isle, burned their ships at anchor." "He wins battles for another man's kingdom," Balon roared, the sound echoing off the stone walls. "He has forgotten who he is. The salt has been washed from his blood by northern snows. He's a pet, a tame kraken taught to fetch sticks for a wolf." Aeron Damphair Greyjoy, his hair long and matted with seaweed, began to chant softly. "What is dead may never die." "He is dead to me," Balon snarled, turning his furious gaze on his brother. "The boy I sent away is gone. This creature is a Stark in fish skin. He had a chance to return to us, to bring us a crown and an alliance. Instead, he chooses to be their dog." He had waited for Theon's message. For weeks, he had anticipated a raven from the Stark camp, a plea from his son to join the war, to let the Ironborn loose on the north while its armies were south. It would have been the perfect opportunity. He would have crowned himself king of the Iron Islands and the north, taken back what was his by right of the old way. But the message never came. Instead, he heard whispers from traders and sailors. Theon Greyjoy, leading raids against the Lannisters. Theon Greyjoy, celebrated in the Stark camp. Theon Greyjoy, his own son, had made the North's war his own. The strategic calculus had changed entirely. To attack the North now would not be to strike an undefended back. It would be to declare war on a kingdom where his own son and heir was a celebrated commander. It would be an act of war against Theon himself. Some of the Ironborn captains, who valued strength and success above all, might even see Theon's victories as a point of pride. They might hesitate to fight against the son of their lord, a proven warrior leading a veteran fleet. "We wait," Balon decided, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Let the wolves and the lions bleed each other dry. Let my son play his games. When they are both weak, then the kraken will rise, and I will remind him what it costs to betray your own blood." The Iron Fleet remained at anchor, a brooding forest of masts in the harbor of Lordsport. The great reaving of the north would not happen. Winterfell remained untouched. Under the watchful eyes of Sir Roderick Castle, the castle was a bastion of calm and order. Bran Stark, seated in the High Lord's chair in the Great Hall, listened dutifully to the complaints of farmers and the requests of merchants. Maester Luwin stood at his side, guiding him, counseling him. The stone walls felt safe. The days fell into a comfortable rhythm. There were no Iron Men at the gates, no betrayals from within. Theon's choice, made hundreds of miles away, had created a shield around his childhood home. One afternoon, a letter arrived from Catelyn at Riverrun. Bran read it in his chambers, Osha standing guard by the door. His mother's words were full of worry for Robb and his sisters, but they were not the words of a woman shattered by grief. They were the words of a mother whose sons were safe. She wrote of her pride in him, in how he was keeping their homes secure. She wrote of Robb's victories, and in a tone of surprised warmth, of Theon's. "He has become a great asset to your brother," she wrote. "He commands the Manderly fleet with a skill that would make his ancestors proud, though I pray he uses it for better ends than they did. Robb calls him his sea-wolf." Bran looked out the window towards the gray sky. He missed Robb and Jon and even Sansa and Arya. But he did not feel abandoned. He was the Stark in Winterfell, and he would hold it until they returned. Rickon, still wild and young, chased his direwolf through the courtyard below. The sounds were of life, not of fear. The smoke from the castle's chimneys rose straight into the cold air. The heart of the north was strong. It was not bleeding. It was waiting, patient and powerful, a reserve of strength for its young king in the south. Because Theon Greyjoy had not come home, Winterfell had never been more secure. And because Bran and Rickon were safe, their mother, hundreds of miles away, would not be driven to an act of desperate, war-altering madness. The Kingslayer, Jaime Lannister, remained in his cell beneath Riverrun, his value as a hostage undiminished. The chain of events that would have led to ruin had been broken before its first link was even forged. Robb's war council was a study in contrasts. The gruff northern lords, men like the great Jon Umber and Rickard Karstark, advocated for a direct, brutal assault on Harrenhal to draw Tywin Lannister out. Edmure Tully, now Lord of Riverrun, argued for a more cautious, defensive posture to protect his newly reclaimed lands. But it was Theon, back from his coastal campaign with the smell of salt still on him, who offered a third way. "We have Tywin pinned," Theon argued, his hand sweeping across the map of the Westerlands. "He cannot retreat, or we will take the Riverlands piece by piece. He cannot advance, or our archers will cut him to ribbons in the Trident's marshes. But his power isn't here in the field. It's in the gold of Casterly Rock. It's in the port of Lannisport. That's where we hurt him." He had spent 2 months proving his theory. His raids, conducted with a mix of ironborn cunning and northern discipline, had been wildly successful. He'd captured a dozen Lannister trade cogs, burned a score of fishing vessels, and even mounted a daring night raid on a watchtower overlooking Lannisport itself, setting its beacon ablaze with barrels of pitch. The western coast was in a state of panic. Lord Tywin was being forced to divert men and resources from his main army to defend his own home. "Lord Karstark is right that we need to be aggressive," Theon continued, nodding respectfully to the older man. "And Lord Tully is right that we must be careful not to overextend. So let us be both. We use the rivers and the sea. I will take my ships and 500 men down the Tumblestone and into the Blackwater Rush. We sail past King's Landing at night and hit the Kingswood from the coast. We burn their timber operations, raid their hunting lodges. We become a ghost fleet in Tywin's own backyard. It will force him to divide his forces further. He will make a mistake. And when he does, Robb, you will be there to punish him for it." The great Jon Umber, who had initially been suspicious of the squid, let out a booming laugh. "By the gods, the boy's got the right of it. A wolf that swims. I'd like to see the look on Tywin Lannister's face when he hears a kraken is knocking on his southern door." Robb listened, his expression thoughtful. The plan was audacious. It was dangerous. It was also brilliant. It was a strategy born of 2 worlds, the patient, grinding strength of the north and the unpredictable, lightning-fast raiding of the Iron Islands. It was a strategy only Theon could have devised. "Do it," Robb said, his decision made. "Take the men you need. And Theon," he added, his voice dropping slightly. "Come back." Theon just smiled. "I'm a wolf now, Your Grace. We always come home." As Theon's fleet became a persistent, infuriating thorn in the Lannisters' side, the Northern Army's morale soared. They were not losing, they were winning, and their king was not being forced to make impossible choices. The issue of Jaime Lannister, which could have fractured his alliance, instead became a source of strength. Catelyn Stark watched her son from the battlements of Riverrun. He carried himself differently now. The weight of the crown still rested heavily on his shoulders, but it no longer seemed to bow him. He was confident, decisive, buoyed by his victories and the unwavering loyalty of his men. She knew a great deal of that was because of Theon. The boy she had always seen as a painful reminder of a past rebellion had become one of her son's most trusted pillars. Her thoughts often drifted to her daughters, Sansa and Arya, alone in the Viper's Nest of King's Landing. The desire to see them again was a physical ache. But her other sons were safe. A raven from Bronn arrived every fortnight, detailing the peaceful administration of Winterfell. Knowing that half her children were secure gave her the strength to endure the separation from the other half. She had visited Jaime Lannister in his cell only once. He was as arrogant and infuriating as ever, taunting her about her husband, about her children. In another world, a world where she believed Bran and Rickon were dead, his words might have broken her. His offer to trade himself for her daughters might have seemed like the only hope in a dark and desolate world. But in this world, she was not broken. She was the mother of the king in the north, a king who was winning his war. She had looked at the Kingslayer, his golden hair matted with filth, his hands in chains, and felt not desperation, but a cold, hard resolve. "You are my son's prisoner, Kingslayer," she had told him, her voice steady. "And you are his most valuable asset. You will remain here until he has won his war and secured the return of my daughters. You will not be traded. You will be the price of his victory." Because she did not act out of grief, Rickard Karstark had no cause for rage. His sons had been killed by Jaime Lannister, and he wanted vengeance, but he was a practical man. He understood the strategic value of the prisoner. As long as the king held him, justice might one day be done. He would not have stood for the prisoner's release, but he could abide his confinement. And so, the Karstark men, thousands of them, remained a vital part of Robb's army. The northern cause was not fractured by grief or betrayal. It was a unified, iron-hard fist, poised to strike. The pressure became too much for Tywin Lannister. With his western ports in chaos, his supply lines from the south threatened by Theon's ghost fleet, and Robb's unbroken army on his flank, he could not win a decisive victory. Every day cost him more gold and more men. Pragmatism, the cold arithmetic of power that had always guided him, dictated a change in strategy. He sent a raven under a peace banner. He requested a parley. They met in the shadow of the ruined towers of Harrenhal, a place that reeked of fire and death. A neutral ground for an uncivil negotiation. Robb Stark arrived with his honor guard, Catelyn, at his side, and his chief commanders, including Theon Greyjoy, flanking him. Tywin Lannister sat upon a black warhorse, flanked by his brother Kevan and a host of lesser lords. He was the picture of imperial power, his crimson and gold armor gleaming in the pale sunlight. "You have fought well, boy," Tywin began, his voice devoid of warmth. He addressed Robb, but his cold eyes flickered to Theon for a moment. "But you cannot win. The might of the Iron Throne is absolute. However, I am a reasonable man. I am prepared to offer terms." Robb sat tall on his gray gelding, gray wind pacing restlessly at his side. "I'm listening, my lord." "Withdraw your forces back beyond the neck," Tywin said, his terms sharp and precise as shards of glass. "Swear you will never again take up arms against the Iron Throne. In return, the king will grant you a full pardon. We will recognize your title as King in the North, with dominion over all lands north of the neck. You will rule your own lands, but you will bend the knee as your father did. And of course, you will return my son." It was a tempting offer. Everything the North had fought for, save for true sovereignty. Great Jon Umber shifted in his saddle, grumbling. Before Robb could answer, Tywin's gaze settled fully on Theon. "Lord Greyjoy, a curious title, is it not? Does the wolf now speak for the kraken? Your father sits on his salt throne, growing old. He has no heir at his side. He watches as his only living son plays soldier for the enemies of his house, for the son of the man who defeated him and took you as a hostage. Tell me, what honor is there in that?" The air grew thick with tension. Every northern lord turned to look at Theon. This was the moment of truth, the question that had lingered in the shadows for years. Was he a Stark, or was he a Greyjoy? Theon urged his horse forward a single step, his face calm. He met Tywin Lannister's gaze without flinching. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it carried across the field with absolute clarity. "I was a hostage, Lord Lannister. You are right in that. But Lord Stark did not treat me as one. He gave me a home. He gave me an education. He gave me a choice. Not a choice of which banner to fly, but a choice of what kind of man to be." He paused, letting the words settle. "My father is the man who gave me away. Ned Stark was the man who raised me. My father taught me the iron price, to take what you want through blood and fire. Ned Stark taught me that a man makes his own honor, and that loyalty cannot be taken. It can only be given. I have chosen my honor. I have chosen my family. Robb Stark is my brother. He is my king, and I will stand with him until the end." He drew his sword, the steel ringing in the quiet air, and pointed it not at Tywin, but at the sky. "The king in the north!" A roar erupted from the Stark men. "The king in the north!" they bellowed, a wave of sound that shook the very stones of Harrenhal. Theon's declaration had not only answered Tywin's challenge, it had galvanized the entire army. He had publicly, irrevocably chosen them. Robb looked at Theon, a look of profound, unspoken gratitude in his eyes. He then turned back to Tywin, his own resolve hardened to steel. "My price for your son, Lord Lannister, is my sisters, safe and unharmed. My price for peace is my crown, whole and unbroken. We will have a sovereign and independent kingdom, or we will have war. Those are my terms." Tywin Lannister's face was a mask of cold fury. He had tried to splinter his enemy, and had instead fused them together. He had lost, not the war, but this crucial battle of wills. Without a word, he turned his horse and rode away. The parley was over. The war would go on. But something had fundamentally changed. The Northern cause was no longer just a rebellion. It was a brotherhood, sealed by a choice made in the shadow of a dead king's fortress. The failure of the parley forced Robb's hand on another matter, Walder Frey. The Lord of the Crossing was a wound that would not stop festering. Robb had broken his oath, and the insult demanded satisfaction. In the original turn of events, desperation would have driven him to the twins, seeking to mend the alliance at any cost. But Robb was not desperate. His army was whole, its morale sky high. He was winning. He approached the twins not as a supplicant, but as a conquering king. His full, undivided army made camp on the south bank of the Green Fork, a sea of tents and banners that Walder Frey could see from his highest tower. He sent terms, not apologies. He offered his uncle, Edmure Tully, Lord of Riverrun, to marry Roslyn Frey. It was a more than suitable match, a great lord for a daughter of a lesser one. He also offered generous trade rights and a seat on his royal council. It was an offer of alliance between equals, not the groveling of a desperate boy. Walder Frey, a man who respected only power, saw the thousands of hardened northern soldiers and the confident young king who commanded them. He saw a king who had bested Tywin Lannister in the field and at the negotiating table. He saw a cause that was winning. He was still a bitter, petty man, but he was not a suicidal one. He accepted. The wedding at the Twins was a grand, if tense, affair. The great hall was filled with Freys and Northmen, the air thick with the smell of roasted meat and suspicion. Rose Bolton watched the proceedings with his pale, unnerving eyes, his mind no doubt calculating the shifting odds. But there was no conspiracy to join. Tywin Lannister's offer of the North held little appeal when the North was so demonstrably strong. Bolton was a survivor, and for now, survival meant loyalty to the young wolf. The music played, the wine flowed, and Edmure and Roslyn were wed. There was no slaughter, no betrayal. The doors were not barred. The musicians did not draw crossbows. The Rains of Castamere was not played. The alliance was secured, and the Stark army, its path north now clear, was stronger than ever. The Red Wedding was averted, becoming nothing more than a bad dream that never was. Later that night, in the command tent pitched by the river, Robb and Theon shared a horn of ale. The tension of the day had finally broken, replaced by a quiet, bone-deep satisfaction. Grey Wind lay by the fire, his great head on his paws. "You saved me today, you know," Robb said, his voice low. "At Harrenhal, and here." Theon looked into the flames. "I told him the truth, that's all." "The truth?" Robb smiled faintly. "It's never that simple. You could have chosen him, chosen your father. You could have been a prince." "I was a prince in a cage," Theon replied, swirling the ale in his horn. "Your father, he never once called me a hostage, not to my face. He called me his ward. He treated me like a son, not like you or Jon, no. I was always the Greyjoy boy, but he gave me a place to stand, a chance to be more than just my father's son. Balon Greyjoy gave me life, but Ned Stark taught me how to live it." He looked at Robb, his eyes serious. "I'm not a prince, Robb. I'm the brother of a king, and I wouldn't trade that for all the salt and rock in the world." Theon knew, in that moment, the full cost of his choice. He could never go home. The Iron Islands were lost to him forever. He had chosen the wolf over the kraken, and, in doing so, had severed his own roots. He was a sea-wolf, a man of two worlds belonging fully to neither. He had found his family, but lost his birthright. The victory was real, but it was bittersweet, a ghost of the man he might have been always at his shoulder. The war ground on into a bloody stalemate. The Lannisters, their power base in King's Landing, secure after Stannis Baratheon's defeat at the Blackwater, could not push north. Robb's kingdom, unified and secure, could not push south. It was a war of attrition, of raids and skirmishes along the borderlands. Then came the Ravens, their news falling like hammer blows. Joffrey Baratheon was dead, poisoned at his own wedding feast. Tyrion Lannister was accused, had escaped, and in his flight had murdered his own father, Tywin Lannister. The rock upon which House Lannister was built had crumbled into dust. Cersei was Queen Regent for the boy king Tommen, but the real power now lay with the Tyrells. The game board had been violently upended. A council was held at Riverrun. The northern lords were jubilant. This was their chance. "We march on King's Landing now," the great Jon roared, slamming his fist on the table. "With Tywin dead, the whole rotten structure will collapse." Robb listened, his face a mask of concentration. He looked at Theon, who had been quiet throughout the meeting. "What do you say, brother? You know the southern courts better than most of us." Theon traced a line on the map. "The Tyrells hold the capital. Mace Tyrell is no Tywin Lannister, but his daughter is cunning, and they have the largest army in Westeros. Marching south is what they'll expect. It's what Tywin would have done." He looked up. "We shouldn't be looking south. We should be looking east." He tapped a finger on the map, far across the narrow sea. "The rumors are growing stronger. A Targaryen girl, 3 dragons, an army of eunuchs that do not break. While the lions and the wolves and the stags and the roses tear each other apart, the real storm is gathering. Tywin's death doesn't mean we've won. It just means the game has a new player." A silence fell over the tent. Robb stared at the map, at the vast, empty space of the sea. He had won his kingdom. He had secured his crown. He had kept his army and his family together. He had done the impossible. But Theon was right. Winning this war was not the end. It was merely the beginning of the next one. The choice of one man, the decision to treat a boy as a ward instead of a hostage, had saved a kingdom. But the world was larger than the north, and across the sea, a queen with fire in her blood was making her own choices. The board was set. The pieces were in new positions. The Wolf King was secure in his den. But winter was still coming, and with it, fire. And so we leave them there, on the precipice of a new and uncertain age. A choice born of honor created a kingdom. But in the great game, a kingdom is just another piece to be played. The question is no longer how the North can win its freedom, but what a Wolf King will do when he finally meets a Dragon Queen. What happens next? That, as always, is where the story truly begins.